Hi everybody, Tommy James here, and this is Inside Tracks. You know, one of the questions I get asked a lot, and have for a lot of years, is how did you get into the business? How did it work? How did you make Hanky Panky? What happened? What got you into show business? When I got started, I was 12 years old, and I started my first band. We called ourselves the Tornadoes in my little hometown of Niles, Michigan. And we first played the variety show in school, and we got such a great response that we decided to keep the band together and try to play VFW halls and American Legions. And we ended up playing sock hops and the YMCA and wedding receptions and basically any place that would have us. When I was 14 years old, I got a job in a little record shop called the Spin It Record Shop in Niles. And I learned the trade papers, and I learned the distributors and the songwriters and the labels and all of the publishers. I met an individual who was our local distributor. He was working for a little one-stop distributorship that did all the mom and pop stores called Singer One Stop out of Chicago. And this fella was named Bud Ryder. So one day we got into a discussion about his studio. He had a little recording studio and a little label. And the studio was in the back of his record shop in Hastings, Michigan. It was called Northway Sound. He would basically record country acts, and he had a new act, by the way, called Del Shannon. You may have heard of him. And he said he's got this screwy keyboard called an Ondeoline or something. Anyway, he said, so we threw out a record on him. Well, that actually happened. It became Runaway. He asked if we'd be interested in coming up to his studio and recording a couple songs. And of course my answer, I thought about it for about a second and a half and said, hell yes! So we went to Hastings, Michigan one Saturday afternoon and recorded these two sides, actually. One side was called Judy, a song I wrote about my girlfriend at the time, and the other was called Long Ponytail. This was a cover of the Fireballs record. And so we released it on Northway Sound Records. And I can't tell you what it was like having my name on my first record. It was bliss beyond compare. So I knew what I wanted to be for the rest of my life right there. The record, of course, was terrible and did nothing. So about a year later, a fellow by the name of Jack Douglas, who was a local DJ on WNIL in Niles, we happened to get into a conversation, and he says, well, you know, Tom, I'm starting a new little label called Snap Records. Would you be interested in recording for us? And I thought about it for a minute and said, hell yes! And I saw this band, they were friends of mine, called the Spinners, not to be confused with the R&B group from the 70s. And they played this song called Hanky Panky, and I'll never forget, it immediately put everybody on the dance floor. They must have requested that thing 6 more times. I just decided that we had to do that song. There's no getting around it. That was one of those party rock songs that just made everybody move. And so I said, that's got to be our record. So I rehearsed it with the guys. All I could remember was my baby does the hanky panky, you know, 6 words basically. And we really didn't know where the song came from. And so I went back to the record shop and we looked it up, and it turns out that Hanky Panky was on the flip side of a record called That Boy John by the Raindrops on Jubilee Records. Now That Boy John was about John Kennedy, and after he was killed they took the record off the market, and of course the B-side went with it, so really nobody ever heard this record. We went into the studio and we sort of made up a little B section. I saw her walking on down the line, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so we recorded the song, and it came out okay. We released it on Snap Records, and it actually made it in about 6 counties. We were on all the jukeboxes, and by this time we had our own title strips, you know, these guys. It became our song for a long time, but of course, no distribution, so. Following year, 1965, I graduated from high school, and I took my band on the road. In early 1966, we're playing this dumpy little club in Janesville, Wisconsin. And right in the middle of our 2 weeks, the club goes belly up. I don't know if that was an omen or not, or the way we were playing, but he got shut down by the IRS. And so we went to get our equipment, and there was yellow tape, all like a crime scene, all the way around the building. And so we banged on the door and begged them to let us have our equipment, and they did. So we went home, back home to Niles, feeling like real losers. It was awful. That was one of the longest road trips I ever had, between Janesville, Wisconsin and Niles, Michigan, and I dragged myself into the house. But that's how God works, because I walked in the house and the following day got the call that changed my life. It was the woman who owned the record shop, Edith Frushi. "Tom, you're home. Stay right there. Jack Douglas wants to talk with you." I said, "Okay, what's the matter?" So Jack Douglas, the producer of the record, calls. And he said, "Tom, listen, you're not going to believe this. Hanky Panky is a hit." I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" He said, "Stay right there. Don't move." And so the next call was from a fellow by the name of Nick Sensi. Nick Sensi says to me, he says, "Tom, we finally tracked you down. Listen, you're not going to believe this, but your record is #1. I said, "Who is this?" I said, "Somebody's pulling some joke on me." I said, "No, I'm telling you, it's serious. Your record's #1. What happened?" He gives me the whole story, that the record was picked up out of a record cemetery, out of an old record store, and that they had this little record business in Pittsburgh where they would basically bootleg records, and they would make local hits out of them and sell them locally and never tell anybody. Well, the problem was they tried that with Hanky Panky, and Hanky Panky, he says, was the biggest record Pittsburgh had ever had. He said it entered the charts at 1. So they said, "Listen, you got to come to Pittsburgh. You got to do TV and be on the radio, and you got to play. I'm picking you up Thursday night, and we're going." And so I couldn't put the original band back together because a couple of them were married, and a couple of them, and they didn't believe that it was going to happen. So I went to Pittsburgh by myself with Jack Douglas, and outside the city limits, I'm nobody. As soon as we cross the city limits, I have the #1 record. I sort of grabbed the first bar band I could find, and they were called the Raconteurs, and they were great. They sang great, they played great. A week later, we're in New York, and we signed with Roulette Records, who took the record. This record came out. This is the final version of Hanky Panky, and that came out on Roulette Records, and they took it to #1 nationally and internationally, and it ended up being the biggest record of the summer. So, and this was the album, by the way, that came out about 6 weeks later. By the way, the great miracle of how we got tracked down was this little thing up here, Snap Records, Niles, Michigan. Because the first place they called was the record shop where I used to work. And if we hadn't put Niles, Michigan on the record label, we wouldn't be talking here today.